In recent times, the classical portrayal of an animated villain has changed dramatically. In days long past, villains were obvious and bombastic characters with their villainy being instantly revealed. But over the last few decades, this archetype has slowly been replaced with twist villains to varying degrees of success. Why have an obvious bad guy the audience can spot right away when you can have a mystery to entangle their brains as they try to guess which character is going to end up being this year's big bad? Well, at least that's the idea. Now, it's no secret that I'm not the biggest fan of these types of characters, but that shouldn't suggest that I hate them necessarily. As a matter of fact, I think there's a lot of potential in twist villains that's hardly ever achieved. And that brings us to the topic of this video, Atlantis, the Lost Empire. Widely hated by critics and audiences alike, Atlantis was quickly forgotten about due to the poor performance of the film and the fact that most people didn't seem to mesh with the characters. As a matter of fact, this film is so not in the zeitgeist that I've yet to find a single Disney twist villain tier list that even includes this film's bad guy. Most people seem to associate the twist villain trope with 3D animation, and so it's no surprise, really. But it's also a shame because I contend that Disney's greatest twist villain of all is contained within this film. Now, before I explain why this is, I feel like I need to mention a few things to put the rest of this video into context. Now, first of all, I'm only counting Disney villains in this assessment, and so Pixar, DreamWorks, etc. aren't being considered at the moment. I have 2 other videos about twist villains in the works, and so if you like this, let me know and I'll make another one. But for now, we're just looking at Disney. Second of all, I have made a list of criteria that I believe must be met in order for a twist villain to be truly great, so that we can help contrast the good with the bad. So, let's get into that. Oh, and this video contains spoilers for Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Frozen, and Atlantis, just a heads up. Number 1, the twist has to be genuinely surprising. It's why Yokai from Big Hero 6 is a total flop. It's so heavily telegraphed that he's the villain that it's not surprising at all because you already know. Since by at this point Disney had already shown us that they'd adopted this trope in full swing, it was all too obvious that this guy was going to be Yokai. I mean, you know that the evil businessman is a red herring, and so the only other person it could possibly be is the teacher. To be honest, I was really hoping they'd end up making the kid's brother the villain. I mean, wouldn't that have at least been a little more interesting and a little less obnoxiously obvious? I know the story would have to be ultimately changed for that, but it would have been more interesting than what we got. But in order for a twist villain to work properly, the audience has to be caught off guard, but in a satisfying way. You can't pull a Prince Hans on us and make us more confused than satisfied with the story. Number 2, the character's villainy has to be hinted at in some way before the big reveal. Otherwise, you deny the audience member who pays close attention the ability to actually guess where the story's going. And if they don't do this, it also means you can't go back and see the fun Easter eggs that subtly imply the evil nature of the villain earlier on. It's why Bellwether is a terrible example of a twist villain. There's absolutely no indication this character is evil at literally any point in the entire film, and so when she's finally revealed to be behind the whole scheme, it's just more confusing than anything. The few subtleties associated with this character don't really imply that she's evil. I mean, it's odd that she doesn't have the slashed pupils of the other sheep in the film, and it's also kind of funny that she wears wool, but none of that would lead the audience to believe that she's a bad person. Oh, and of course, another great example of this is Hans. Not only is there no indication that he's evil in the film, there's actually evidence to the contrary. At one point, he literally has the opportunity to kill Elsa, but he doesn't, and he saves her life. Bad character. And finally, number 3, the transition of their character must be necessary for the plot to progress. This basically means that you can't be able to cut the character out of the movie and have it still make sense. A great example of what not to do here is Hans. Okay, why is it necessary to the story of this film that Hans wants to be the king? Why does this story even need a villain? I mean, if you boil it down, the theme of this film is familial acceptance. A young girl has a trait about herself that she cannot control and that she's tried to get rid of but can't. Because of the judgment of her society, she can't be open about this trait and is forced to keep it a secret. She runs away to a secluded place where she can be free of judgment, but slowly begins to become bitter for a reason she can't explain. When a family member comes to see her, she explodes in a rage and both symbolically and literally hurts her sister, giving her a cold heart. I know it's subtle. In the end, after her sister saves her life, she realizes that the reason for her bitterness and what she needed all along was the love and acceptance of her family. What does any of that have to do with a spooky guy who wants to kill her and take her throne? None of this is in service to the story in literally any way at all. Now, I understand that the reason they did this is because they needed a reason to make Anna choose Kristoff instead, and I guess they never thought of the fact that they could just cut this character out of the movie if they didn't want to reconcile that. But even if you want to have this love triangle, wouldn't it be more interesting of an idea to have Anna come to the conclusion that even though she has romantic feelings for two different people, she can only choose one of them? And give the lesson to the audience that sometimes, even though there's multiple people that you like romantically, and both of them are good guys who are nice and well-meaning, you can only choose one. But no, it's much easier to just make one of them a total psycho so you can avoid any complicated theme in this character's plotline. But back to the point, Hans being evil is not necessary to the plot of this film at all. You can cut him out of the movie completely and just replace this last scene with the Duke instead, and nothing changes. So with that established, let us begin. I actually really like Atlantis. I think it's a really good movie, and I think it gets way more hate than it deserves. I won't pretend that there's not some dumb stuff in there, like the fact that the main character can decipher runes from a dead language, but he can't pronounce Kadakakash. But by and large, it's a fun story that keeps you on your toes the whole time. And speaking of keeping you on your toes, this film has one of the most well-developed and interesting twists regarding the villain that I've ever seen. Lyle Rourke is basically thematically the thing that Disney wanted to do with Hans, but failed miserably to accomplish. Namely, have a friendly, charismatic guy who's revealed to have selfish and callous motives. In the story, a cartographer named Milo Thatch makes many attempts to research the lost city of Atlantis, but can't find enough money to fund it. A wealthy friend of his grandfather informs him that he's recovered a journal with a map to Atlantis, and promises to fund his trip there. The captain of the submarine, and the one who was hired to obtain the journal originally, Lyle Rourke, is sent to command the mission with him. After braving the many dangers of the ocean, the team discovers that Atlantis is actually occupied by humans, who gain their life force from a giant blue crystal. Shortly after, it's revealed to the audience that Rourke is actually a mercenary who wants to steal the crystal and sell it, killing the native population in the process. So let's put him to the test using our previously established criteria. Firstly, is it genuinely surprising? The answer is a resounding yes. Rourke is depicted as a light-hearted jokester and an almost fatherly figure to his team throughout the film, leaving you pretty comfortable in your assumption he's a good guy. But even if you manage to pick up on the subtle hints earlier on, the film still has a pretty shocking twist in store for you. You see, the twist isn't just that Rourke is evil. The twist is actually that the entire cast of the film is evil, and all of them are working with Rourke and turn on Milo, making this a particularly fascinating twist to me that separates it from most others in the same vein. Secondly, is there any hint throughout the film that Rourke is evil? Now, this is probably the most difficult criteria to get right, because you have to put hints toward the character's evil that aren't too obvious, but that also plant a seed in your head. The trick to doing a good twist villain is planting the subconscious knowledge of the character's true intentions in your mind, and allowing the reveal to make it conscious. Well, there are several indications throughout the film that Rourke has ulterior motives, one being in his first scene he literally says this:
"Believe me, this will be small change compared to the value of what we're going to learn on this trip."
Yes, this should be enriching for all of us.
When Preston first shows Milo the pictures of the rest of the crew, Lyle's picture is obscured in shadow, creating a somewhat sinister tone. Also, when the submarine goes down, Rourke is the very first person to evacuate the ship, which, if you don't know, is viewed as cowardly for a captain. Naval commanders are supposed to ensure the safety of the crew before themselves. So it proves that when push comes to shove, he'll put his own life first. Finally, when they enter the city, Rourke orders his men to stand by and await his orders, hinting that he's planning an attack. All of these things give your brain something to chew on, but they don't tell you right out the gate that he's evil necessarily, just a complicated person. And that's why it works so well. Finally, is his transition to a villainous role necessary for the plot to progress? It's completely necessary. You see, by this point in the film, the characters have gotten to the city, and without any further conflict, the plot is basically over. I mean, All that would have been left to do was go, "Wow, we found it. Okay, let's go back home, I guess." The story goes to a standstill, but with Rourke's twist, we're given the climax that the film needs to send us off with a proper conclusion. But a well-written story can only be as good as the character themselves, and this is the cherry on top. Lyle Rourke is just a really fun bad guy. As a huge fan of campiness and witty banter, I really love that pretty much every line from this guy is some quip or one-liner.
That crystal is the only thing keeping these people alive. You take that away and they'll die.
Well, that changes things. Helga, what do you think?
Knowing that, I'd double the price.
I was thinking triple. Look at it this way, son. You were the man who discovered Atlantis, and now you're part of the exhibit. P.T. Barnum was right.
He comes across like a particularly well-written and entertaining Indiana Jones villain. James Garner voices Lyle, and I think it's worth noting that Tommy Lee Jones and Kurt Russell auditioned for this role, and Garner got it even still. Those huge names were ultimately not picked, however, because Disney liked the more neighborly and good-spirited vibe that Garner gave the character, as opposed to Russell and Jones's performances were described as being a little too serious. The casting director said that Garner's voice fit Rourke like a glove, and I have to agree.
Milo Thatch. Pleasure to meet the grandson of old Thaddeus. See, you got that journal. Nice pictures, but I prefer a good Western myself.
What makes this extra entertaining is to know that Garner had an absolute blast on set and was super excited to be a part of the project. He wanted to portray Rourke as a sort of Old West sheriff archetype because he thought that would help the audience view him as the good guy. This endless charisma is especially entertaining because even to the last scene he's in, he never cracks, so to speak. A lot of villains with similar personalities are revealed to, in reality, be quick to anger and dismissive.
You'll never be outgrown or neglected, never abandoned or forgotten. What? You want your mommy back? She never loved you. Don't be such a baby!
But with Rourke, it's not the case. He actually maintains his calm, jokey nature even while his plan is actively being completely ruined right in front of him.
Well, I have to hand it to you. You're a bigger pain in the neck than I would have ever thought possible.
And to finish it all off, Rourke gives us a fantastic and extremely engaging final conflict for the film, where we get some really cool fight choreography atop this air balloon to finish it off. I mean, he even transforms into a monster just to keep you on your toes. Oh yeah, and also he joins the small percentage of Disney bad guys who actually murder someone. In this case, it's his own girlfriend.
You said we were in this together! You promised me a percentage!
Next time, get it in writing.
Now finally, I urge you very strongly to watch this film if you haven't. The best way I can possibly think of to encourage you to watch this movie if you're a fan of Disney villains but you're on the fence is to let you know that the guy who directed this film also directed Beauty and the Beast and Hunchback of Notre Dame. Gaston and Claude Frollo, two of the most beloved characters in the Disney Rogues Gallery. So give this film a chance and see what you think of it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you'll watch the movie. If you like this video, like it, dislike it if you didn't like it, and subscribe for more. That's all for now.